Say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But let me tell you something. When that old dog discovers her own family has been stealing from her for years, she can learn to bite back harder than anyone ever imagined. When my tech entrepreneur son and his business partner wife thought they could manipulate a 72-year-old widow into signing away her life savings, they made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed I was just another technologically helpless grandmother who couldn't tell the difference between an email and a text message. Boy, were they wrong. By the time I was finished with them, I had built a social media empire that destroyed their business, exposed their crimes to millions of followers, and turned me into the most famous revenge-seeking grandmother on the internet. My name is Cordelia Thorne, and this is how I went from confused victim to viral sensation, leaving my scheming family in digital ruins. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. My name is Cordelia Thorne, and at 72 years old, I learned that age is just a number when it comes to outsmarting people who think they're smarter than you. For most of my life, I was technologically challenged. I had a flip phone until 2018, thought Facebook was something you did with actual books, and believed going viral meant catching the flu. My husband, Reginald, was the tech-savvy one in our marriage. He handled our finances online and managed our investments through digital platforms. When Reginald passed away suddenly from a heart attack 3 years ago, I inherited not just his estate, but also a complete mystery: how to manage a digital world I had never learned to navigate. That's when my son Xerxes stepped in to help. At 38 years old, Xerxes had built what he called a disruptive tech startup with his wife Zelda. They lived in a minimalist glass house filled with devices I couldn't identify and spoke in a language of acronyms I couldn't understand. API, SaaS, blockchain, cryptocurrency, it might as well have been ancient Greek to me. "Mom, you can't keep living in the digital dark ages," Xerxes told me with the patient tone people use when talking to children. "Let Zelda and me help you transition Dad's accounts and investments into something more manageable. We'll set everything up so it's simple for someone your age." Someone my age? The phrase stung, but I was grateful for their help. After Reginald's death, I felt completely lost trying to navigate online banking and digital investment accounts. The first red flag should have been how eager they were to help. Xerxes and Zelda had barely visited while Reginald was alive, claiming they were too busy scaling their platform and optimizing their growth metrics. But suddenly, after his death, they became incredibly attentive, visiting twice a week and staying for hours to help me understand my options. The second red flag was how quickly they wanted to move. "The financial markets are volatile right now, Mom. We need to get your money into more secure, managed accounts before you lose everything to market fluctuations." Over 6 months, I signed document after document that Xerxes and Zelda assured me were just standard modernization procedures. They set up new investment accounts, transferred my savings to high-yield digital platforms, and created what they called a family trust structure that would protect my assets while giving them authority to manage my finances more efficiently. I trusted them because they were family, because they spoke with confidence about financial strategies I didn't understand, and because I was genuinely grateful to have someone handling complications that overwhelmed me. This blockchain-based investment strategy will generate passive income streams while protecting your principal through diversified cryptocurrency portfolios, Zelda would explain with the kind of authority that made me feel foolish for not understanding. "The traditional banking sector is obsolete, Cordelia. We're positioning you for the financial future." What I didn't realize was that they were positioning me for financial ruin while enriching themselves with every signature I provided. The awakening came on a cold Tuesday morning in February when I tried to withdraw money for groceries and discovered my checking account had been frozen. The bank teller, a kind woman named Patricia, whom I'd known for 15 years, looked uncomfortable as she explained that my accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity and that I would need to speak with a manager immediately. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm afraid there are some irregularities with your recent account activity. Large transfers, new investment accounts we weren't informed about, and some cryptocurrency transactions that don't match your typical banking patterns. We need to verify that these changes were authorized and legitimate." Cryptocurrency transactions? I didn't even know what cryptocurrency was, let alone how to buy it. As the manager showed me printouts of my recent financial activity, I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. Thousands of dollars transferred to accounts I'd never heard of, investments in companies with names like DisruptCoin and Blockchain Boost, and recurring payments to Tech Venture Capital Management, LLC. The numbers were staggering. Over $200,000 had been moved from my traditional savings into digital platforms I had never heard of, all bearing the electronic signatures I provided during those helpful family sessions. But the real revelation came when I started researching the companies my money had been invested in. Tech Venture Capital Management, LLC wasn't just some random investment firm. It was Xerxes and Zelda's company. My own son and daughter-in-law had been systematically transferring my life savings into their business accounts while convincing me they were protecting my financial future. They had spent 6 months convincing me that I was too old and technologically incompetent to manage my own finances, all while using my trust and confusion to commit elaborate fraud. They had stolen my life savings while making me thank them for their help. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, something shifted inside me. The confusion and gratitude I had felt toward their help transformed into cold, calculating anger. That's when I decided they had messed with the wrong grandmother. The first thing I did after discovering my son and daughter-in-law's betrayal was something they never would have expected. I started learning, not just about my finances, but about the digital world they had used to manipulate me. If they wanted to play games in cyberspace, I was going to learn the rules better than they ever imagined possible. I started with YouTube tutorials on basic computer skills, then progressed to online courses about digital marketing, social media management, and content creation. For 8 hours a day, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, taking detailed notes on everything from search engine optimization to viral marketing strategies. Every technical term Xerxes and Zelda had used to confuse me became a subject I studied until I understood it better than they did. The learning curve was steep, but I had something they didn't expect: time, motivation, and the focused determination of someone with nothing left to lose. While they assumed I was sitting at home feeling helpless and confused, I was actually building the knowledge base I would need to destroy them systematically. Within 2 months, I had taught myself to use smartphones, tablets, social media platforms, video editing software, and content management systems. I learned about audience engagement, algorithm optimization, and the psychology of viral content. Most importantly, I learned to research and document everything with detective-like precision. But knowledge alone wasn't enough for my revenge. I needed a platform to reach millions of people with the story of what Xerxes and Zelda had done to me. That's when I discovered the power of social media storytelling, particularly the incredible reach of platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube for sharing personal narratives that resonated with audiences. The plan began to crystallize in my mind like a beautiful, terrible flower. I wouldn't just expose their financial fraud. I would turn my story into compelling content that would entertain millions while systematically destroying their business reputation. I would become the kind of viral sensation they claimed to understand but had never achieved themselves. My research revealed that authentic storytelling, particularly by older adults, was incredibly popular on social media. Grandparents sharing life wisdom, elderly people learning new skills, and stories of justice against younger people who underestimated their elders consistently attracted massive audiences. I had all the elements for viral content: compelling personal story, clear villains, and the novelty of a grandmother mastering technology to defeat tech entrepreneurs. I spent weeks crafting my content strategy with methodical precision. Every post would be carefully planned to maximize engagement while building toward the ultimate revelation that would destroy Xerxes and Zelda's credibility in the tech community. Phase 1 was establishing my presence and credibility. I created accounts on every major social media platform and began posting daily content about my journey learning technology as a 72-year-old widow. The early videos were simple: me struggling with basic smartphone features, celebrating small victories like sending my first email, and sharing amusing mistakes that came with learning digital skills later in life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People loved watching a grandmother navigate the technology learning curve with humor and determination. Comments poured in from viewers sharing their own stories, and my follower count grew steadily as word spread about the charming elderly woman entering the digital age. But I had a secret weapon that none of my viewers suspected. Behind the charming, bumbling grandmother persona, I was actually becoming incredibly sophisticated at content creation, audience engagement, and strategic storytelling. Every mistake was carefully planned to maximize relatability. Every learning moment was designed to build toward the dramatic revelation I was planning. Within 3 months, I had accumulated over 50,000 followers across platforms, with some of my videos receiving hundreds of thousands of views. The irony was delicious. I was becoming more successful at building an online audience than Xerxes and Zelda had ever been with their startup. Phase 2 involved gradually introducing my family into the narrative. I began mentioning my helpful son and daughter-in-law, who had been teaching me about modern financial management. I posted videos of myself trying to understand investment apps, cryptocurrency wallets, and digital banking systems, always crediting Xerxes and Zelda for their patience. My audience loved it. The comments were filled with praise for my wonderful family members who were taking such good care of me, and requests to see more content featuring the tech-savvy young couple helping their grandmother modernize her life. They had no idea they were building an audience who would soon witness the complete destruction of the people they currently admired. The most satisfying part was that Xerxes and Zelda had no idea what I was doing. They occasionally saw me with my phone or tablet, but assumed I was just playing games or looking at pictures. They never bothered to check my social media presence because they were certain I couldn't possibly understand how to create meaningful content or build an audience. "Mom's really taking to that tablet we got her," I overheard Zelda tell Xerxes during one of their visits. "She's always tapping away at something. It's cute how determined she is to learn, even though she'll never really understand how any of it actually works." If they had bothered to investigate, they would have discovered that their technologically hopeless mother-in-law was rapidly becoming a social media phenomenon, building an audience who would soon learn exactly what kind of people Xerxes and Zelda really were. Phase 3 was documenting everything with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. Every financial document, every email exchange, every text message conversation became content for the dramatic revelation I was planning. I learned to take screenshots, save video recordings of conversations, and create detailed timelines of their fraudulent activities. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Xerxes and Zelda's startup was already struggling financially, despite stealing my money. Their disruptive tech platform was actually a barely functional app that had failed to attract legitimate investors, and they were using my funds to pay their business expenses while desperately seeking real funding. I learned that the tech startup community was incredibly sensitive to reputation issues. A viral social media scandal could destroy their chances of ever receiving legitimate investment or building successful careers in the industry. But what happened next made them realize their biggest mistake wasn't just stealing from me. It was underestimating what a motivated grandmother could accomplish when she set her mind to mastering their own game. The moment I had been building toward arrived on a sunny Thursday morning in October, exactly 1 year after I had first discovered Xerxes and Zelda's betrayal. By this time, my social media following had grown to over 2 million people across platforms, and my daily posts about learning technology as a grandmother were regularly featured in viral content roundups. My audience loved me. They saw me as their adopted internet grandmother, cheering for my small victories and celebrating my progress from confused widow to confident digital native. They had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular takedown in social media history. I had planned the revelation like a military operation, coordinating across multiple platforms to maximize impact and ensure that Xerxes and Zelda couldn't escape once the truth came out. The final video began like any other in my series, with me sitting in my kitchen, smiling warmly at the camera. "Hello, my dear internet family," I began, in the same grandmother tone that had attracted millions of followers. Today marks exactly 1 year since I started this journey of learning technology, and I want to share something very important with all of you who have supported me along the way. I paused for effect, letting my expression shift from warm to serious. You see, my learning journey didn't begin because I wanted to become a social media star. It began because I discovered that my own son and daughter-in-law had been stealing my life savings while pretending to help me understand modern financial technology. The comment section exploded immediately. My followers couldn't believe what they were hearing from their beloved internet grandmother, but I was just getting started. For the past year, while I've been sharing my cute videos of learning to use smartphones and tablets, I've also been documenting one of the most elaborate financial fraud schemes you can imagine. And today, I'm going to show you everything. What followed was a masterpiece of digital storytelling. I had edited together months of evidence into a compelling narrative that was part documentary, part revenge story, and part educational content about elder financial abuse. Screenshots of fraudulent transfers, recordings of manipulative conversations, and detailed explanations of how Xerxes and Zelda had systematically stolen over $200,000 from their own family member. My son Xerxes Thorne and his wife Zelda run a company called Tech Venture Capital Management, I explained, using their real names and showing official business documents. They convinced me that blockchain investments and cryptocurrency portfolios were the future of financial security. What they didn't tell me was that I was actually funding their failing startup while they transferred my money into their own accounts. The response was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times, and my story was being picked up by news outlets, fraud prevention organizations, and other social media influencers. Hashtag Cordelia's Revenge began trending on multiple platforms as millions of people shared their outrage about my treatment and their admiration for my response. But I had saved the best for last. Now, some of you might be wondering how I, a supposedly technologically helpless grandmother, managed to build such a successful social media presence while uncovering and documenting this fraud. I said with a smile that my followers had never seen before, not grandmotherly warmth, but predatory satisfaction. The truth is, I've been studying digital marketing, content creation, and social media strategy for over a year. Every cute video of me learning technology was actually carefully crafted content designed to build an audience for this moment. I didn't just learn how to use technology, I learned how to master it well enough to destroy the people who tried to exploit me. The revelation that their beloved, bumbling grandmother had actually been a sophisticated content strategist all along sent shockwaves through my audience. The comments shifted from sympathy to amazement to absolute delight at the strategic brilliance of my long-term plan. The damage to their startup was immediate and total. Screenshots of my videos appeared on tech industry forums and social media groups with entrepreneurs and investors expressing disgust at Xerxes and Zelda's behavior. Potential business partners began distancing themselves from Tech Venture Capital Management, and the few clients they had managed to attract started demanding their money back. Xerxes called me within hours of the first video going live, screaming with rage about how I had destroyed his life and ruined his business prospects. His anger was so intense that I recorded the entire conversation and posted it as a follow-up video, showing my followers exactly what kind of person he really was when his manipulation tactics no longer worked. "Mom, how could you do this to your own family?" he demanded. "We were trying to help you." "Help me?" I replied calmly. "Xerxes, you stole over $200,000 from me while convincing me I was too stupid to manage my own money. You used my grief over your father's death to manipulate me into signing documents I didn't understand. You committed fraud against your own mother and called it family assistance." Zelda tried a different approach, showing up at my house with tears and apologies, begging me to take down the videos because they were destroying innocent people who had made mistakes. I invited her in for tea and recorded our entire conversation, which became another viral video showing how manipulators operate when their initial tactics fail. "Cordelia, please, you have to understand, we never meant to hurt you," she pleaded. "We genuinely thought we were helping you make better financial decisions. By transferring my money into your business accounts, by creating fake investment opportunities that were actually funding your startup expenses, by lying to me about cryptocurrency transactions I never authorized." The final blow came when I revealed that I had not only documented their financial crimes, but also provided all evidence to law enforcement, banking authorities, and state agencies that investigate elder abuse. Within weeks of my videos going viral, Xerxes and Zelda were facing criminal charges for financial fraud and professional sanctions that would prevent them from working in the financial services industry. But what happened next made them realize their biggest mistake wasn't just stealing from me, it was underestimating what a motivated grandmother could accomplish when she set her mind to mastering their own game. The most satisfying consequence was watching them realize that their victim had become more successful than they had ever been. My social media following continued to grow as my story spread, leading to book deals, speaking engagements, and consulting opportunities with organizations fighting elder fraud. I had turned their attempted exploitation into a lucrative career as a digital content creator and fraud prevention advocate.
Within 2 weeks of my revelation videos going viral, the consequences for Xerxes and Zelda were cascading beyond anything I had initially imagined. The tech startup community in our city was surprisingly small and tightly connected. Word of their fraudulent behavior spread through professional networks like wildfire. Their office lease was terminated early, citing reputational concerns. The few investors who had shown interest in tech venture capital management withdrew their preliminary funding offers. Their business bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Most devastatingly for their egos, they were quietly removed from the membership roster of the Young Entrepreneurs Association, an exclusive networking group they had bragged about joining. But the professional destruction was only the beginning. The personal consequences were far more satisfying to witness. Xerxes had always prided himself on being seen as a tech visionary, someone who understood digital innovation better than his peers. He attended networking events, posted thought leadership content on LinkedIn, and positioned himself as a mentor for other aspiring entrepreneurs. All of that crumbled overnight when screenshots of my videos began circulating in his professional circles. Tech entrepreneur steals $200K from elderly mother became a headline that followed him everywhere. His carefully curated LinkedIn profile, once filled with posts about disrupting traditional industries, became a digital ghost town. Former connections distanced themselves, potential collaborators disappeared, and his posts went from receiving dozens of comments to complete silence. Zelda faced her own humiliation within their social circles. She had always been the one who organized dinner parties, charity fundraisers, and networking events for their friends, all activities that required a certain level of social standing and respectability. When word spread about their fraud charges, invitations stopped arriving. Friends who had once sought her advice about investments and financial planning began avoiding her calls. The couple who had once held themselves up as examples of young entrepreneurial success became pariahs in their own community. They were forced to move out of their expensive glass house, partly because they could no longer afford the mortgage without my stolen money, and partly because neighbors had recognized them from my viral videos and made their lives uncomfortable with constant stares and whispered conversations. But perhaps the most poetic justice was what happened to their disruptive tech platform. Without my funds to keep them operating, they were forced to shut down the business entirely. The app they had claimed would revolutionize financial management for older adults was removed from app stores, their website went dark, and all their grand promises about changing the world evaporated like morning fog. The irony was exquisite. Two people who had built their identities around being smarter and more technologically sophisticated than their elderly relatives had been completely outmaneuvered by the 72-year-old grandmother they had tried to exploit. Meanwhile, my success continued to grow in ways I had never anticipated. Major news networks began reaching out for interviews. Publishing houses contacted me about writing a book about my experience. Organizations focused on elder rights invited me to speak at conferences and workshops. How a grandmother became a social media sensation to expose family fraud became a story that resonated far beyond my original audience. I was featured in magazines, podcast interviews, and documentary projects about the power of social media for justice and the growing problem of elder financial abuse. The speaking engagements were particularly rewarding. Standing in front of hundreds of people, social workers, law enforcement officers, financial professionals, and other seniors, sharing my story and teaching them about the warning signs of financial manipulation felt like turning my pain into purpose. The most important thing I learned, I would tell these audiences, is that age is not a barrier to learning new skills or fighting back against injustice. Xerxes and Zelda assumed that because I was older and unfamiliar with technology, I would be permanently helpless. But what they actually did was motivate me to become more technologically sophisticated than they ever were. I also began consulting with tech companies and financial institutions about how to better serve older customers and protect them from fraud. My experience gave me unique insights into both the vulnerabilities that scammers exploit and the tremendous capacity older adults have for learning when properly supported. The consulting work was lucrative, but more importantly, it felt meaningful. I was using the very technology skills that Xerxes and Zelda had taught me to help protect other people from experiencing what I had gone through. 6 months after my revelation, I received a settlement letter from their lawyer. They wanted me to remove the videos, stop speaking publicly, and agree not to pursue additional litigation in exchange for returning some stolen money. I read it twice, laughed, and created another viral video reading portions aloud to my audience. My dear followers, it seems Xerxes and Zelda still don't understand how this works. They think they can negotiate their way out of consequences, just like they once thought they could manipulate me into signing documents I didn't understand. The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in expressing outrage at the attempted manipulation and support for rejecting their offer. That video became another viral hit, generating even more media attention. Their attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. The criminal trial began almost exactly 18 months after I had first discovered their betrayal. By that time, I had transformed from confused victim to nationally recognized advocate. I testified with confidence and precision, presenting evidence with the same attention to detail I had learned while creating my content strategy. Watching Xerxes and Zelda sit in defendant chairs, looking smaller and more defeated than I had ever seen them, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I had experienced since my husband's death. They had tried to make me feel helpless and stupid. Instead, they had inadvertently taught me skills that not only allowed me to expose them, but to build a career more successful than anything they had ever achieved. But what happened next showed them that my transformation was complete and irreversible.
The criminal trial became the final stage of my transformation from victim to victor. After 18 months of building my case and establishing myself as a nationally recognized advocate, I walked into that courtroom not as the confused, helpless elderly woman Xerxes and Zelda had tried to exploit, but as someone who had turned their crime into a platform for justice. The prosecution's case was ironclad. I had provided them with months of documented evidence, recorded conversations, financial records, and detailed timelines of the fraud. My social media documentation had proven invaluable. Every screenshot, every saved email, every recorded phone call preserved with meticulous attention to detail. But more than evidence, I had credibility. The jury saw not just another elderly fraud victim, but a woman who had fought back, learned new skills, and built something meaningful from her experience. My story had already been validated by millions of followers, major news outlets, and professional organizations. Xerxes and Zelda looked exactly like what they were, defeated scammers caught and exposed by their own victim. Their expensive lawyers tried every strategy, but there was no defending against the mountain of evidence I had compiled. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented my evidence methodically, showing exactly how they had systematically transferred my money into their business accounts while lying about investment opportunities. I testified for 4 hours, explaining not just what they had done, but how I had discovered it, documented it, and used my experience to help other potential victims. The defense's only strategy was arguing the transfers had been well-intentioned mistakes rather than deliberate fraud. They painted me as a vindictive mother who had misunderstood her children's attempts to help with modern financial management. But this narrative crumbled when the prosecution played recordings clearly showing their deliberate deception. When Xerxes took the stand, he tried to present himself as a concerned son protecting his elderly mother from poor financial decisions. But under cross-examination, he couldn't explain why he had hidden his company's involvement, created fake investment documentation, or never informed me that my money was funding his startup expenses. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Xerxes was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution plus damages totaling over $350,000. Zelda received 3 years and a similar financial judgment. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning. Civil lawsuits that followed ensured they remained financially devastated for years. Professional sanctions prevented them from working in financial services, technology, or any industry requiring trust and credibility. Most satisfying was watching them realize that while they would spend years trying to rebuild their lives, I had already built something bigger and more successful than anything they had ever achieved. The day of their sentencing, I created one final video in my series. Sitting in my familiar kitchen setup, wearing the confident smile that had attracted millions of followers, I spoke directly to my audience about the conclusion of my journey. My dear internet family, today justice was served. Xerxes and Zelda have been held accountable for their crimes, and the legal system has confirmed what we already knew, that elder financial abuse is serious crime that will be punished severely. I paused, letting my expression shift to something more reflective. But this story was never really about them getting punishment. It was about showing the world that age is not a limitation, that learning new skills is possible at any stage of life,
and that sometimes the best revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies can only watch while you achieve everything they dreamed of but never earned. The comments on that final video were overwhelmingly supportive, with thousands sharing their own stories of overcoming challenges, learning new skills later in life, or standing up to people who had underestimated them. My story had become bigger than personal revenge. It had become inspiration for anyone dismissed because of their age, background, or perceived limitations. The success that followed exceeded even my ambitious expectations. Publishers competed to offer book deals for my memoir. Television producers wanted to adapt my story for documentaries. Speaking bureaus offered lucrative contracts to share my experience at conferences and educational institutions. I chose opportunities carefully, focusing on projects that would help protect other elderly people from financial fraud while continuing to build my platform as an advocate for lifelong learning and digital literacy among seniors. Within 2 years of my first viral video, I had built a media empire worth more than the money Xerxes and Zelda had stolen from me. My social media presence had millions of subscribers, my book became a bestseller, and my speaking engagements commanded impressive fees. But the most satisfying success was personal. I had discovered talent and abilities I never knew I possessed. I had learned to create compelling content, build engaged audiences, and use technology as a tool for justice and education. I had transformed from someone overwhelmed by the digital world to someone who mastered it well enough to help others navigate it safely. The woman once intimidated by smartphones was now featured on technology magazine covers as an example of successful digital adaptation. The grandmother dismissed as too old to understand modern finance was now consulted by major financial institutions about protecting elderly customers from fraud. Xerxes and Zelda tried to convince me that I was obsolete, that the modern world had passed me by. Instead, they had motivated me to prove that experience, determination, and strategic thinking could be more powerful than youth and technical knowledge when applied with purpose. Their biggest mistake hadn't been stealing my money. It had been underestimating what I could accomplish when they gave me a reason to fight back.
2 years after my viral revelation, I stood in the office of my digital media company, looking out over the city where Xerxes and Zelda had once tried to make me feel small and powerless. What I saw wasn't just buildings and traffic, it was the empire I had built from their betrayal. My book about digital revenge had spent months on bestseller lists. The publishing advance alone had been more than double what they had stolen from me, and the royalties continued to grow as international translations brought my story to audiences around the world. The book had spawned follow-up publications about digital literacy for seniors and elder fraud prevention. But the book was just one revenue stream in what had become a multimedia empire. My social media presence now generated substantial advertising revenue. The speaking bureau that represented me was booking events months in advance, with corporations, universities, and government agencies paying premium fees to hear my story about transformation and resilience. The consulting work had evolved into something I had never expected, a full-service company helping technology companies and financial institutions better serve older adults. My team worked on projects ranging from user interface design to fraud prevention systems to digital literacy programs. What made my consulting company unique was my personal story. When I recommended changes to make banking apps more accessible to seniors, financial institutions listened because I had lived the experience of being confused and manipulated by complex digital systems. When I advised tech companies about protecting elderly users from scams, they implemented my suggestions because they knew I had turned my own victimization into expertise. The irony was exquisite. Xerxes and Zelda had tried to exploit my unfamiliarity with technology, assuming it made me permanently vulnerable. Instead, they had motivated me to become so sophisticated in the digital world that companies now paid me substantial fees to share that expertise. My office walls were covered with awards and recognition from organizations I had never heard of when this journey began. Elder advocacy groups had named me their Digital Advocate of the Year. Government agencies had invited me to serve on fraud prevention task forces. Technology publications had featured me as an example of successful aging in the digital era. But perhaps the most satisfying recognition came from an unexpected source. The same young entrepreneurs organization that had quietly expelled Xerxes and Zelda after their fraud conviction. They had invited me to speak at their annual conference about turning adversity into opportunity in the digital age. Standing before an audience of ambitious young entrepreneurs, many the same age as my son and daughter-in-law, I shared the story of how their peers' criminal behavior had inadvertently launched my second career. The audience was captivated by the transformation narrative, from confused victim to successful entrepreneur in her 70s. During the question and answer session, a young woman asked, "What advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are struggling to find their breakthrough moment?" I smiled, thinking of Xerxes and Zelda sitting in their prison cells, probably wondering how their attempt to exploit their elderly mother had resulted in her becoming more successful than they had ever been. "Sometimes," I replied, "your biggest breakthrough comes from your biggest betrayal. The people who try to tear you down often end up showing you strengths you didn't know you had." My son and daughter-in-law thought they were taking advantage of a helpless old woman. Instead, they were creating a formidable competitor who understood both their tactics and their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. The applause was thunderous. Here was a room full of young people who had probably dismissed older adults as irrelevant to their tech-driven world, giving a standing ovation to a 74-year-old grandmother who had outmaneuvered, outmarketed, and out-earned the young entrepreneurs who had tried to exploit her. After my speech, dozens of attendees approached me with business cards, collaboration proposals, and requests for mentorship. The same generation that Xerxes and Zelda represented now saw me as someone they wanted to learn from, work with, and emulate. That evening, I returned to my office to find an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from Xerxes, writing from prison, asking if I would be willing to visit him so he could apologize and perhaps discuss potential business opportunities when he was released. Even behind bars, he still didn't understand what had happened. He still thought this was about business opportunities and networking. He had no comprehension that his crime had transformed me into someone who no longer needed anything he could offer. I deleted the email without responding. I had more important things to do, like planning the expansion of my media empire and preparing for the documentary crew that was coming next week to film my story for a major streaming platform. But what happened next would show Xerxes and Zelda that their biggest mistake wasn't just underestimating me, it was creating an enemy who now had the resources, platform, and motivation to ensure their story became a cautionary tale told for generations.
3 years after Xerxes and Zelda had been sentenced, I received a phone call that would provide the perfect ending to my revenge story. It was from a documentary producer at a major streaming platform who wanted to create a limited series about my transformation from fraud victim to digital media mogul. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, "we're fascinated by your story. We'd like to create a 6-part series about how you turned your family's betrayal into one of the most successful second career launches in recent history. We're prepared to offer you a 7-figure deal for the rights." I accepted immediately, not because I needed the money. My various ventures had already made me wealthier than I had ever imagined, but because I knew that a major streaming series would ensure that Xerxes and Zelda's crime would be preserved forever in digital history. Millions of people around the world would know exactly what they had done and how spectacularly their plan had backfired. The filming process took 6 months. The production team interviewed dozens of people who had been part of my journey. Law enforcement officers who had investigated the case, tech industry experts who now consulted with me, fraud prevention advocates who had been inspired by my story, and dozens of social media followers who had supported me from the beginning. But the most satisfying interviews were with Xerxes and Zelda themselves. The streaming platform had negotiated permission to film them in prison, and both had agreed to participate, apparently hoping that appearing remorseful might help their cases during upcoming parole hearings. Watching them sit in prison uniforms, looking older and more defeated than I remembered, trying to explain their actions to the documentary crew was profoundly satisfying. They had aged terribly during their incarceration, while I had flourished and grown stronger. "I never meant to hurt my mother," Xerxes said to the camera, his voice lacking the confidence and authority he had once projected. "We genuinely thought we were helping her make better financial decisions. The whole situation got out of hand, and I take full responsibility for my mistakes." Mistakes. Even after everything that had happened, he still couldn't admit that what they had done was deliberate fraud rather than well-intentioned errors in judgment. Zelda's interview was even more pathetic. She spent most of her time crying, talking about how the public exposure had destroyed their lives and expressing regret about the misunderstandings that had led to their current situation. "Cordelia is a brilliant woman," she said through tears. "We never gave her enough credit for what she was capable of. If we had just been honest with her from the beginning, maybe we could have built something together instead of this." The documentary crew also filmed my reaction to watching these prison interviews. I sat in my elegant office, wearing a designer suit, surrounded by awards and evidence of my success, as I watched my son and daughter-in-law try to rewrite history from their prison cells. "It's interesting," I told the camera calmly, "that they still don't understand what they did wrong. They think this story is about financial mismanagement or family misunderstandings. They don't realize that this story is about the consequences of underestimating people based on their age, background, or perceived limitations." The documentary premiered 18 months later to massive audiences and critical acclaim. It won awards at film festivals, sparked discussions about elder fraud prevention, and generated millions of social media conversations about aging, technology, and family betrayal. But the most satisfying moment came when I learned that the prison where Xerxes was incarcerated had decided to screen the documentary as part of their rehabilitation programming. He would be forced to watch his own mother tell the story of how her crime had made her more successful than he had ever been. The streaming series generated even more opportunities for me. Publishers wanted me to write additional books, speaking bureaus doubled their booking requests, major corporations sought me out for consulting contracts. The story of my transformation had become bigger than just personal revenge. It had become a cultural phenomenon about the untapped potential of older adults in the digital age. 6 months after the documentary premiered, I received another letter from Xerxes. This one was different from his previous attempt at reconciliation. Instead of asking for forgiveness or business opportunities, he was asking me to help him understand how I had become so successful. "Mom, I've watched the documentary dozens of times, and I still don't understand how you learned all those digital skills so quickly. Could you send me some books or resources about social media marketing and content creation? I want to understand what you did so I can maybe build something legitimate when I get out." I stared at the letter for a long time, amazed at the audacity. He was asking the woman whose life savings he had stolen to provide him with free education about the skills she had developed as a direct result of his betrayal. He wanted me to teach him how to replicate the success he had inadvertently made possible. I wrote back with a single sentence. "Some lessons can only be learned through experience, and some experiences can only be earned through consequences." That was the last communication I ever had with either of them. They had given me the greatest gift of my life, the motivation to discover abilities I never knew I possessed, and the determination to build something meaningful from betrayal. But they had also taught me that some people never learn from their mistakes, no matter how severe the consequences. As I prepared for my next project, a technology literacy program for seniors that would be launched in partnership with major tech companies, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The woman who had once been intimidated by smartphone apps was now designing digital education curricula. The grandmother who had been dismissed as technologically hopeless was now setting industry standards for inclusive technology design.
5 years after my journey began, I stood before a packed auditorium at the National Technology Conference, delivering the keynote address to an audience of 5,000 tech industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators. The title of my presentation was The Gray Revolution: How Senior Citizens Are Reshaping the Digital Landscape. As I looked out at the faces in the audience, many young enough to be my grandchildren, others approaching retirement themselves, I thought about how completely my life had transformed since that cold February morning when I discovered my bank account had been frozen. The woman who had once been intimidated by basic smartphone functions was now considered one of the leading voices in the movement to make technology more accessible and inclusive for older adults. The grandmother who had been dismissed as irrelevant to the digital economy was now running a multi-million-dollar media empire that employed over 50 people. But more importantly, I had used my platform to create lasting change that extended far beyond my personal success story. The digital literacy program I had developed was now being implemented in senior centers, libraries, and community colleges across the country. Major technology companies had adopted design standards I had helped create to make their products more accessible to older users. Financial institutions had implemented fraud prevention systems based on my recommendations and experience. When my son and daughter-in-law first tried to help me with my finances, I told the audience, they assumed that my age made me incapable of understanding modern technology. They thought they could manipulate me because I didn't know the difference between legitimate investments and cryptocurrency scams. They were wrong about my capacity to learn, but they were right about one thing. I didn't understand their world. I paused, letting the audience process what I was saying before delivering the punchline that always got the biggest response. So I decided to master their world well enough to destroy them in it. The audience erupted in applause and laughter. Even after years of telling this story, the response never got old. There was something universally satisfying about watching an underestimated person triumph over those who had tried to exploit them. But this story isn't really about revenge, I continued as the applause died down. It's about the incredible untapped potential that exists in demographics that the tech industry has traditionally ignored. There are millions of older adults who are ready, willing, and able to engage with digital technology, but only if we design systems that meet them where they are, rather than expecting them to adapt to interfaces that were created by and for people half their age. The presentation continued for 45 minutes, sharing data about the growing economic power of older consumers, case studies of successful age-inclusive design, and practical recommendations for companies that wanted to tap into this underserved market. But the core message remained the same. Underestimating people based on their age, background, or apparent limitations is not just morally wrong, it's bad business. After my presentation, I was approached by hundreds of attendees who wanted to share their own stories of overcoming age discrimination, discuss collaboration opportunities, or simply thank me for changing their perspective on what older adults could accomplish in the digital world. One young entrepreneur, probably about as Xerxes' age, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Miss Thorne, I have to confess something. Before I saw your documentary, I probably would have dismissed you as irrelevant to my business. I've been trying to raise funding for an app that helps seniors manage their health care, but I was pitching it as a product for their adult children to manage for them. You've made me realize I was completely wrong about my target audience." Good. The biggest mistake in product development is assuming you know what your users need without actually talking to them. If you're building something for seniors, seniors should be the ones evaluating whether it works. This conversation was repeated dozens of times throughout the conference. My story had become more than just personal triumph. It had become a catalyst for changing how an entire industry thought about aging, technology, and human potential. That evening, as I sat in my hotel room reviewing emails and preparing for the flight home, I received a message that made me smile. It was from a woman in her 80s who had watched my streaming documentary and decided to start her own social media channel about gardening. She now had over 1 million followers and had signed a book deal with a major publisher. She wrote, "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to learn something new. I always thought social media was for young people, but you prove that age is just a number when it comes to connecting with audiences and building something meaningful." Her message was one of thousands I had received over the years from older adults who had been inspired by my story to learn new skills, start new projects, or simply refuse to accept limitations that others had imposed on them based on their age. This was the real victory, not the money I had earned, the awards I had won, or the humiliation I had inflicted on Xerxes and Zelda, but the cultural change I had helped create. The conversation about aging in America was different because of my story. The technology industry was more inclusive because of the standards I had helped establish. Countless older adults were more confident and capable because they had seen what was possible when someone their age refused to accept defeat. As for Xerxes and Zelda, they were released from prison 2 years ago but remained largely irrelevant to my life. They had tried to rebuild their careers in the tech industry, but found that their criminal history and association with elder fraud made them unemployable in the field they had once claimed to understand so well. Last I heard, Xerxes was working as a night manager at a chain restaurant, and Zelda was selling insurance over the phone. Their biggest mistake hadn't been stealing my money.
It had been assuming that crime would go unpunished and that I would remain powerless to respond. They had created their own nemesis by underestimating what a motivated grandmother could accomplish when she decided to fight back. Today, as I continue to build my media empire and work on projects that help protect other seniors from financial fraud, I often think about that first day when I discovered their betrayal. I could never have imagined then that their crime would become the foundation for the most successful and meaningful chapter of my life. They wanted to exploit my ignorance about technology. Instead, they motivated me to become an expert. They tried to steal my financial security. Instead, they helped me build wealth beyond anything I had previously achieved. They attempted to make me feel helpless and obsolete. Instead, they pushed me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. So, now, what city are you watching from, and rate this story 0 to 10? If you enjoyed watching a grandmother master technology to destroy fraudsters while building a digital empire, subscribe for more stories of justice served with technological precision. Because sometimes the best revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies can only watch while you achieve everything they dreamed of but never earned. Remember, respect your elders because that forgotten old woman might become the most powerful person in your world. And if you try to exploit someone because of their age, don't be surprised when they use that motivation to master your own game and beat you at it. Trust me, it's absolutely delicious.